serving organizations are as well. I see some of my colleagues in employment services on the call. We're also seeing, major funding directions and decisions being made by governments without adequate input or consultation from those of us serving the communities on the ground. Or just directions that maybe don't meet the needs of the communities that we serve. So these are some of the reasons why this session is so urgent. I would add that as organizations working with communities, we are working with communities that are facing new challenges, different challenges, persistent and evolving threats. And it's an opportune time to build new relationships and alliances to support and protect the communities that we serve. And finally, those government funders that we value and rely on extensively have their own aims and purposes, while we as organizations and the communities that we serve may have different aims and goals and ideas and innovations. And I think this is where working with foundations can provide real exciting opportunities for innovation and grassroots leadership. And I think that's some of what we're going to hear about today. So that's kind of what led us to today. And that's, most of what I have to say. Before I pass it over to the panelists, I want to remind you that this is your opportunity to ask questions. So as you're hearing people speak, or if you have questions already, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will be hearing from each panelist and then going through the questions that have come in. The only questions that are not welcome are questions about why you were declined funding. If you applied to any of these foundations in the past, that's just not the right forum for those conversations. So most foundations do have mechanisms to provide feedback. And if those mechanisms exist, please use the appropriate channel. But any other questions you have are welcome, and I invite you to put them in the chat. So, without further ado, I'll introduce our excellent panel. And in order of who will be speaking, which is alphabetical by first name, so don't read anything else into it. We have Aldeli Alban Reina, who's the Director of Grants and Community Initiatives at the Laidlaw Foundation. Bayan Khatib, Impact Director, Refugee Newcomers from Northpine Foundation. Nous avons Naoulou Charles, le Directeur des Programmes for Communities at the McConnell Foundation, and Nneka Otogbolu, Chief Operating Officer at the Foundation for Black Communities. And our panelists have really interesting backgrounds, doing interesting work, and I invite you to read more about their backgrounds in their bios, which are linked in the chat. You'll also find the links to each foundation in the chat as well. And that's all I have to say. So Aldeli, I'll invite you to begin your remarks.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Madeleine. Hi, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. So I'll talk a little bit about the foundation. So Laidlaw Foundation, we've been around for 76 years this year. We celebrated our 75th anniversary last year. We are a private foundation that's based out of Toronto, but funds all over Ontario. And we fund grassroots, nonprofits, and charitable organizations. The only thing we don't fund are for-profit entities, and that includes social enterprises. But if you do have if you're a registered nonprofit, a registered charity, or a grassroots group, that is definitely eligible. When it comes to kind of thinking about what we do at the foundation, we support young people who are impacted by now 4 systems. So the criminal system, the child welfare system, the education system, and most recently, we are moving into the space of environmental racism as well. So those are the 4 sort of pillars that we're working with, and we just entered into a new strategic plan from 2025 to 2030. Also, it's important for us to situate where we get our wealth from. So the Laidlaw Foundation got its wealth from the lumber company that the Laidlaw family had back in the 1800s, which was then sort of sold in 1949, which created this foundation 75 years ago. And so this is how we have our endowment fund. And for us, it's also really important to sort of situate where the wealth came from, because it's important to also know how we're talking about wealth redistribution, particularly because we focus on Black and Indigenous youth-led work and initiatives. And so the importance of naming where wealth is coming from, who it impacted, and then how we're redistributing dollars to Black and Indigenous youth. So Laidlaw Foundation, we're a small team of 6, 5.5 really, if you're thinking about it. So it's a small but mighty team. We do a lot of work for a small staff. But myself, as Madeline said, I'm the director of grants and community initiatives. And so I work on a lot of the granting streams that we have. So we really focus on, especially with our new strategic plan, we focus on 3 particular pillars. So investing in youth-led solutions, dismantling systemic barriers to advance equity and challenging the status quo, and then centering our mission, vision, values, and theory of philanthropy to transform the philanthropic sector. And those are some of the things that we focus on. We have, in our current work, we have 3 particular streams that might be of interest to yourselves. So our first one is called the Indigenous Youth and Community Futures Fund. So that is a fund that is specifically by and for Indigenous youth. For this particular stream, youth means 35 and under. And again, across the province of Ontario, where we fund, and it has to be by and for Indigenous young people under the age of 35 who are working on things like revitalization of land, language, and culture. And that can kind of look like culture camps. It can look like language immersion and other programs like that. As per this new strategic plan, we will be launching a new fund in 2026, specifically for Black youth. So it'll be called the Black Youth Fund. And so this year we're working on sort of like what the criteria is. We have a Black Youth Advisory, as well as our Indigenous Youth Fund. We also have an Indigenous Advisory. And so it's really all community and youth directed. They let us know what they want to fund. And so that work is being currently done. And then the Black Youth Fund will launch in 2026. So that's something that you want to look out for next year. The best way to kind of look out for our news is really following us on social media and looking at our website as well. And then the Youth Action Fund, which really focuses on the sort of like 4 pillars that I mentioned. So criminal system, child welfare, education, and the environmental racism portfolio that we just have. As being a private foundation, we also do impact investment, because obviously we know that as a foundation, the disbursement quota minimum is 5% now. Laidlaw tends to go closer to 8 to 10% of our endowment fund. But then also what happens to the rest of the percentage, right? Like what happens to the 95+%. And so trying to figure out how to better create impact investing in a way that aligns with our mission and vision, in a way that aligns with supporting Black and Indigenous youth and their communities across Ontario and globally as well. Additionally, we also do some research. And so we had put out a research at the end of 2023 called the State of the Youth Report, which looked at the state of Black and Indigenous youth across Ontario. So we hired an external consultant external consultants to do research for us and kind of like do focus groups and interviews of Black and Indigenous youth across the province. And the idea is to do sort of like an iteration of that every few years to kind of look at what's happening and what they're worried about, what their concerns are, and things like that. In terms of what's important for us as principals, so Laidlaw operates in the by and for model. So we definitely fund Black-led organizations, we fund Indigenous-led organizations and Indigenous and Black-led initiatives. And so for us, it's like the nothing about us without us slogan that came from Black South African disability activist is super important and paramount for the way that we work. So you're not going to see us fund a white-led organization to do work on behalf of another group. So that's, again, super paramount for us. In terms of youth participation, so I'm going to put in the chat for you to see sort of like, it's really an image of a ladder of participation. It's not perfect by any means, but we kind of look at rung 7 for us, which looks at youth initiated and directed. And so for us, that means young people under the age of 30 or 35, depending on the stream, are leading, ideating, designing, implementing, basically doing the entire work and paying themselves for doing so as well, of course. And so the less amount of adult input or direction, the better when it comes to getting funding and being, to getting funding from us. Things that are obviously the types of projects that we fund. So obviously we fund programming. That's like, you know, the majority of the programs that come through our way. But some things that we also fund that sometimes folks might not realize that we do fund are advocacy and public policy, direct action, as well as research. So obviously it can't be your master's research or PhD research, just, thinking about community-based research is something that we definitely fund. So those are some things that we are also kind of mindful of. Obviously, we know that in the sector, in the nonprofit sector, programming is kind of number one. But just if you were kind of thinking about applying for either or, you can also apply for other types of projects. In terms of eligibility, so things like, we can't fund capital expenses, we can't fund outside of the province, we can't fund adult-led activities or anything like that. Everything has to happen within Ontario. Those are some kind of things that we kind of like primarily look at. Obviously, we can't fund for-profit activities as well. And, all of those kind of information are also part of our website. And in terms of like how to apply for our programs, so Laidlaw operates really on a grant application process. So we don't really fund outside of granting streams. So really what you would look at is look to apply whenever we announce call for proposals or calls for applications. And usually those would be done yearly. So the Indigenous Youth and Communities Future Fund has an open call every year. It usually happens in the first quarter of the year. The Black Youth Fund will also very likely be every year. We're just obviously waiting for the Black Youth advisors to let us know what their terms and criteria will look like. And then the Youth Action Fund has been every other year for an open call. So those are some things that you can kind of think about. Like I said, the best way to kind of find out about what we're doing and what we're about is to look at our website and go on our social media. We also have a monthly newsletter where we gather a bunch of grant opportunities, job postings. We also put out research that's either done from our grantees ourselves or just, folks that we've seen post things. And we also share events that are not necessarily just Ontario-based, but just kind of like all over the place in Canada, to kind of strengthen the sector in that way as well. And yeah, I don't know how much time I have left, but I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Aldeli. That's a great overview. Reminder to everyone, the link to the Laidlaw Foundation is in the chat. So you can find some of those additional details that were mentioned there. And any questions that you have for Aldeli, we'll get to at the end. But now I'm going to pass it over to Bayan from Northpine. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bayan Khatib. I'm the Impact Director of the Refugee Portfolio at the Northpine Foundation. So Northpine is a philanthropy foundation founded by John and Kathy Phillips. We work in 5 different focus areas, which 3 of them are place-based, and those include Newfoundland and Labrador, Scarborough, and Winnipeg. 2 other portfolios are nationwide, and that is the formerly incarcerated portfolio and the refugee portfolio, which is the one that I manage. We're actually a very small team of just 9 people. What we hope to do is invest in better outcomes for some of Canada's most underinvested communities. Northpine is quite a bit different from many other foundations in that we actually work with every type of entity, from charities to for-profits to social enterprises, and basically everything else in between. And that's because we believe it's everybody's business to create better outcomes for underserved communities. We utilize different financial instruments, so we're not only giving out grants, but we can give out loans, forgivable loans, equity, and really whatever makes sense to whatever makes sense as we explore new ideas. We mostly fund direct services that come with ambitious outcomes and that also come with plans for scale and sustainability. So if you spend some time on our website, you'll see a big focus on scalable impact. The plan for sustainability is where our funding reaches beyond direct outcomes, and we look for organizations that can build relationships with important stakeholders, collaborations, create shifts in society that can lead to lasting change. A few more features of Northpine funding. We provide a lot of flexibility to the organizations that we work with in how we fund, so in providing unrestricted funding, and in also providing flexibility for organizations to change services, change tracks in any way that is needed as the project unfolds, because we believe in people having a mindset of continuous learning and improvement. We expect that, and so we provide the flexibility for it. We develop a milestone payment schedule together with the organizations that we're going to fund, which often create an upfront payment as needed to start the work, but then subsequent payments are actually dependent on the achievement of the outcomes that we decide on together. And when it comes to the refugee portfolio, the priority areas right now for funding are employment, housing, and language training. And for refugees, these are the big 3 challenges. So most of what we do will be in those areas. The outcomes that we fund in those areas are also things that we've put a lot of thought into, like into identifying the most meaningful metric in those areas. And so when it comes to employment, we fund refugee obtaining gainful employment with retention also in mind. When it comes to housing, we fund refugee obtaining stable housing. Sometimes we fund models that bring all of these things together. So for example, our investment in the Refugee Center in Montreal, which is an affordable housing, is a transitional housing model, but it is paired with employment services and many other wraparound services that the refugees require. So it's multiple services, but the outcome remains the same that we're funding. It's the same as the outcome that I mentioned earlier, which is refugee obtains gainful employment and stable housing. So I'll give you a few more insights about what I look for in the refugee portfolio. I look for people who have a deep understanding of the problem and who create solutions that fit these problems. But also people who are willing to, as I mentioned earlier, tweak and improve and change the solution as they go along. So really, you need to be obsessed with the problem, not with the solution. I look for organizations that are willing to be very ambitious. I think sometimes, you know, it's hard to be ambitious when we're in these environments of we don't know how much funding is coming in and all of that. And before this job, I was the executive director of a charity, so I understand very well that environment. But we do look for organizations that are willing to dream big and set big goals. And we also look for organizations that measure what matters, not vanity metrics, and that are really able to demonstrate that they've made a difference in a refugee's life. So I wanted to give you an example. When it comes to employment, many organizations that I meet do what's called pre-employment supports. So they help refugees understand the Canadian context, create a resume, interviews, that sort of thing. But they don't take them all the way to the meaningful metric, the meaningful outcome, which is refugee obtains meaningful employment. And so we do not fund organizations that don't take the refugee all the way to the end point of what you can call thriving. But really what that means is they have good employment, they're able to obtain stable housing. It's what everybody wants for themselves, and it's what refugees want as well. So we want to work with organizations that get people to that end point. Pre-employment services don't go far enough. So that's a very key thing to think about if you're gonna chat with me later. I also look for organizations that have leadership teams that are representatives of the people they serve, organizations that clearly put community first. So a question that comes up often is, am I willing to work outside of these priority areas? The answer is yes, because I know that there are other needs, that refugees have other needs outside of housing and employment and language training. But it would take a very, very convincing argument with very clear outcomes that show significant impact for me to have that conversation. So how does intake happen at Northpine? It's by invitation on a rolling basis. The process starts with a conversation with me, and then often leads to more and more conversations with me. And then we end up writing a short proposal together that we call the memo. So it's a lot less writing, it's a lot more conversations than probably what you're used to. And so if you feel that, again, we're a small team, so it does sometimes take time for me to respond to people, and it's hard to respond to everybody. But if you feel that you are producing ambitious outcomes in these priority areas, then I would love for you to reach out to me and have an exploration call and chat about it. And there's a contact us page on the Northpine website, but I will also put my email in the chat box for those who want to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bayan. It's really great to hear about Northpine. I don't know about others on the call, but I feel like I started seeing so much more about the work Northpine was doing really recently. So it's great to have this picture filled out. And I'm sure everyone's mind is pinging with ideas. So wonderful. Okay, we're going to move on to our next presenter, Naulu. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and hi everyone. It's really nice to be invited. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. So I'm currently the director of the Communities Focus Area at the McConnell Foundation. So what I want to do first is maybe tell you a little bit more about the foundation itself. So the foundation was founded in 1937 by G.W. McConnell, and we are historically based in Montreal. which leads to our long history and partnership with the city of Montreal. But last year in 2024, we made the decision to establish our head office in Toronto. So we're excited for the opportunity to be able to broaden and deepen our work in Toronto and in Ontario in general. So for those of you who have heard about the foundation several years ago, you probably heard that we were very active in the space of social innovation. So at the time, we used to really look for the most innovative ideas, and we were trying to fund them. And then there's been a shift in the model at the foundation after some leadership changes. And a few years ago, now our model is that we have 3 focus areas, and each one of the focus area has their own strategy. And the way that we make funding decisions is by finding proposals and partnerships that align with the strategy of the focus area. So the one that I'm leading is called the communities focus area, but we actually have 2 others. The reconciliation focus area for Indigenous communities. We have the climate focus area that is about environmental projects. And the reconciliation focus area is focused on an economic strategy. The climate focus area is about the reduction of carbon emissions. So really, the communities focus area is where we can have all of these social justice partnerships and partnerships that have to do with supporting a variety of equity denied communities. So the term that we use is equity denied communities. Unlike some of our colleagues here, we don't have a specific focus on one type of community. So it could be anything from young people to women, migrants, racialized communities, LGBT communities. We have a mandate to support a variety of communities. So what is helpful to know, especially when we're talking to organizations in the settlement sector, is that one of the biggest challenges for us is that we tend to be a funder that stays at the systems level and less at the level of direct services. It doesn't mean that if you're providing direct services that we're not going to be funding you, but we're more the funder that you should go to when you have a project that is about systems change. And by systems change, what do we mean? We don't have an official definition of systems change, but there's one that was created by FSG that kind of aligns with the way we're thinking about systems change. But I think there's a lot of definitions of systems change out there that we could talk about. But I think the way we want to present this is that we are trying to influence, create changes that would address or resolve systemic issues. So now when we talk about systemic issues, we talk about issues that are actually deeply rooted challenges that lie beyond the control of individuals and that are shaped by the interplay of historical, institutional, and collective forces. So this is the way we understand systems change. And our strategy is also aligned with that understanding. If you want to get supported by McConnell Foundation and you send a proposal, one of the first things that we'll be looking at is what is the systemic issue that you're trying to address. And we tend to look for specificity. You know, what is the specific systemic issue that you're trying to address? And then in terms of your solution, the next question is going to be, what is the systemic solution and how systemic the solution that you're proposing is? So after we assess the systemic issue part of your work, we'll be looking for the strategic alignment between the work that you're doing and our strategy. Currently, the strategy in the communities focus area has 3 main pillars. The first pillar is the policy pillar. So it means that we're looking for organizations or groups that are doing work to influence policies that improve the protections for equity denied communities. So it could be anything from changing existing policies, proposing new policies. And by policies, we don't just mean law. It could also be changes to institutional practices in organizations that have so much power that their changes in practices have a dramatic impact in the conditions of equity denied communities. So I need to clarify that last year, we completed a refinement of our strategy, and that was something I had the honor to lead in collaboration with a consulting firm called Agency, and we came up with answers, I would say, to some of the gray areas we have in the way we think about our strategy, and that part about our ability to support institutional changes is some of the things we clarified as well. So it's extremely important to note that we don't fund organizations trying to change their own practices. We would fund communities that are trying to influence these organizations. So that's the policy part. Then the second pillar of our strategy is the collective action pillar. It means that we're looking for groups that are coming together and working together to try and address systemic issues. Behind this pillar, this is a pillar that has always been in our strategy, but behind this pillar is a desire to, and maybe a recognition of the fact that we often notice divisions in society and in various sectors that are not necessarily conducive to better conditions for equity denied communities. So at least in my work, I tend to focus a lot on fostering collective action, not only with the granting, but also with the other roles that we have at the foundation, where we can also play the role of conveners and connecting people. So so we prefer maybe groups coming together to propose work. It doesn't mean that you cannot be funded just yourself as an organization, but we tend to prefer funding work that is not just by isolated organizations. So we'll be looking at the history of your collective, and most of the issues that we'll be funding in collective action will be issues that cannot be addressed by isolated organizations, and you have to come together in order to be able to make a difference. And I mentioned the strategy refinement that we did last year. One of the conclusions, or one of the additions of that process, was the introduction of a third pillar to our strategy. And it's a pillar that we call the regeneration pillar. And the reason why we added regeneration, we recognize that in communities, there's a lot of systems change that is happening that's not necessarily about policy or collective action, but we wanted to create an opportunity for groups that are also addressing historical harm in their communities, that are developing some kind of a vision for how to rethink and recreate certain aspects of their communities. And so we have an entire pillar dedicated to that work now in the communities focus area. So in addition to the strategic alignment, another aspect that we will be looking at is something we call positionality. And I would recommend folks who are interested in learning more about getting funding from McConnell Foundation to go on our website and find the document called the Partnership and Funding Guide. And I'm going to actually post it in the chat here so that you don't have to look for it. This document provides a lot of details on aspects that we'll look at in our decision making that are not just unique to the community's focus area. And one of these aspects, for instance, is positionality. And positionality is our study or our understanding of who is the organization behind the proposal, what is your history in your ecosystem, how do you collaborate with other organizations in the ecosystem, how are you connected to the issue that you're trying to address, what is your history in addressing it. And the reason why it's very important for us to do that study is that we don't want to go into a space and not fund the right organizations that have the right history in that space, right? And we understand that it could actually cause harm. There's other key considerations in how we make decisions and how we assess proposals that are also explained on our website. So if you go on our website in the communities section, you would actually see that we have detailed other key considerations that are part of what I would call the constellation of the factors that influence our decisions. So it's I want to be very transparent with people that it's not a checklist, and it's not as simple as I made this criteria, so I should be funded. There's many variables. So this is why we want to be transparent in exposing all these variables. But at the end of the day, the whether or not a proposal is funded is really left to the analysis as well, and how it plays out. One of the key considerations you'll see on the website is that notion of nothing about us without us that Laidlaw mentioned before. And I want to be 100% transparent. I don't know if our foundation is as far as they are when it comes to the adoption of that principle, but we definitely aspire to that, right? So we definitely aspire to make sure that we fund organizations that are led by the people that they're trying to help. That's a fundamental principle that we're trying to make sure we follow. So in terms of process, for people to be funded, you have to send an application online. Our platform was closed just a few weeks ago. Luckily, we just reopened it a few days ago. So it's perfect timing now. And we have a two-stage process. So the first stage is that you send an expression of interest, and it's a quicker process, less questions. And our team will be reviewing the expression of interest. If we see enough alignment with the strategy, then we will be sending you an invitation to send a full detailed application. And once we receive that full detailed application, then we will be following, depending on the alignment, if we see enough alignment, we'll be following a due diligence process that involves speaking with community contacts, partners, previous founders, experts, so that we better understand the value of the work. And we don't do it just because of that. We also do it because we want to be a learning organization. So every time we speak with community organizations and potential partners, it's an opportunity for us to increase our knowledge on systemic issues and systemic solutions. So we're always trying to do that. So in terms, I think maybe it might be helpful for you to know, we recently published our year in review that could be a good, I think a good overview of the type of partnerships that we have and the type of funding that we do across all focus areas. So I'm going to also maybe post a link to the year in review, and you can read that so that you understand what the foundation has done recently. So in terms of funding, for instance, in the communities focus area, we're talking about 8 million last year, but that 8 million actually includes about 6 million of our already existing partnerships, and maybe around 2 million new partnerships. Every year, we're trying to make sure we have about 1 to 2 million to disperse for new partnerships. Most of the grants we make tend to be multi-year grants. But because of that, we also try to stay away from too many renewals. And this is because when we tend to do too many renewals, then our portfolio is limited and we can't make new partnerships. I guess maybe at this point, what would be helpful for you to know is that concept of additionality. So that's another aspect that we'll look at when we're building our portfolio. So if you look at what we've funded recently and you see an organization that is doing work similar to yours, it doesn't mean that we're going to fund it again, right? So when we're making starting partnerships, we're trying to always add something new to our portfolio, a new angle or a new way to address an issue. That's what we call additionality. So I think I could add more. I don't want to be speaking for too long, but if you have more questions, I'll be happy to respond.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laidlaw, for that comprehensive overview. So many of our organizations are really in that service environment, but I think systems change needs to happen for so much of what we are trying to accomplish. So it's a really great way of kind of approaching thinking the work that we do or the aspirations of our groups and organizations. And I'm sure people have ideas that are germinating. So we have one more speaker before we get to the questions, and I'm glad to see them starting to come through. If you have questions for all the panelists or any individual panelists, please put them in the Q&A. But I'm very pleased to pass the mic to Nneka. Over to you.
Hey, Madeleine. Hi, everyone. My name is Nneka Otobolu, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Foundation for Black Communities. The Foundation for Black Communities was established to ensure that every Black Canadian has the agency to define their future. And the Foundation was established in 2022 with federal support. So the federal government is our core funder. And the FFBC stewards our historical Black-led philanthropic endowment fund of $200 million. And we serve as the philanthropic home for Black communities across the country. Our mission is to invest in change making. And so in doing that, we work alongside the Canadian community, Black communities. We also work alongside our philanthropic partners across the country. We have a small team structure, so I kind of heard that from other panelists as well. We have 13 employees and serve Canada-wide, and we operate a fully remote structure. So I'm joining this webinar from Edmonton. Our pillars are grant making, collaboration, and policy influence. But for this presentation, I'll be focusing on FFBC's grant making. FFBC has got our flagship grant program called the Black Ideas Grant Program. And it was implemented. We started the implementation of the Black Ideas Grant Program in 2023. And so far, we've awarded about $20 million to 268 community groups across the country. The target for the Black Ideas Grant Program is that an organization has to be Black mandated, Black led, and Black serving. They also have to be an incorporated nonprofit or an incorporated charity. But we also support grassroots organizations that are partnering with incorporated groups as well. Our goal is to provide flexible and unrestricted funding to initiatives that are designed to address the most pressing needs of Black communities across the country. And our focus areas are combating anti-Black racism, improving social outcomes, and also improving economic outcomes. Under the Black Ideas Grant Program, we've got 3 funding streams. We've got the core grant stream, which supports core and operational needs. So whatever the organizations will need to keep the lights on. So we fund the, as we like to call it, the unsexy stuff that other funders don't fund. We also have our catapult grant stream that invests in new or existing programs and services. We also have the community spaces stream that supports capital projects and social infrastructure. Our grant program is usually open in the fall of every year. So we're also going to be going out again at the end of the year. Next, I'll be talking about our funding priorities and eligibility criteria. So we fund grassroots and community groups. So from small neighborhood groups to established charities, as long as their primary purpose is delivering programs and services for Black Canadians. For example, eligible applications could include a Canadian incorporated nonprofit or charity, or an unincorporated group partnering with an incorporated nonprofit or charity. So these unincorporated groups could include Black collaboratives, student union, or affinity groups. We usually get questions around the B3 model. When we say B3, we talk about Black-led, Black-mandated. We used to call it Black-focused, but this changed in our last grant stream when we found out that some groups could be Black-focused now, but their mandate could change down the road. So we tweaked that to Black-mandated and then Black-serving. So it means that by Black-led, we mean that most of the organization's leadership, board and operational levels have to be at least 2/3 Black. And by Black-mandated, we mean that the organization's primary goal is to support and engage Black communities meaningfully, and a significant portion of their program activities prioritize serving Black communities across the country. Another criteria is that the organization has to be located in Canada, and their services or proposed activities must be based in Canada. Our grant stream has a non-thematic approach. Here, we want the community to tell us what their priorities are and not the other way around. And so the funding is informed by the community. Our grant-making philosophy is honed on the participatory grant-making approach as well, where at the forefront of the granting decision, we have our community selection circle. This circle is made up of local volunteer-based community committees that review, score, and recommend grant applications and proposals for funding. So none of the decisions on who or what organization or what causes are funded is made by FFBC team. So we delegate the power to the circles of community members. And the CSC is created in every province. With this model, we shift power to the community. What makes an application stand out? We get this question a lot of times. In our last 2 grant streams, what we have seen is that projects or services that tackle core issues such as food security, revitalizing community spaces, or supporting the arts, so cutting across different sectors, have stood out to reviewers. But what we've also noticed is that the reviewers are local to the communities where these applications are coming from. And so they understand better what their community priorities are. So we've seen applications that have, or if I could call them standout applications, cut across different sectors. But one thing that we see that is consistent is that they are community driven. So they are solution oriented as well. They align with the 3 focus areas that I've mentioned, which is addressing anti-Black racism and improving social and economic outcomes for the community. And these projects and services also have demonstrated strong feasibility studies like realistic budget, clear timeline, and capacity for scaling and following through. We've seen strong applications that have shown or have been consistent in aligning with what their community needs are at the time of submission. What are our missions and priorities for the coming year? We will consistently keep investing in change making. We'll consistently collaborate with Black communities across the country, with philanthropic organizations as well. Recently, we had a co-granting arrangement with Vancouver Foundation, where we collaborated to grant to nonprofits in B3 nonprofits in BC. And that has opened up doors to further conversations with philanthropic foundations across the country. We plan to keep doing this, and our priorities for the coming year will be rolling out our Black Ideas 3.0 and growing partnerships across the country as well. We are currently funding research and collaborative efforts, such as our food security systems and other systemic issues that affect Black Canadians in the country. And we are also launching we've just launched our Black Scholarship, Medical Scholarship, collaborating with about 3 universities across the country in Nova Scotia and Montreal and Ontario as well. We work hard in leading equity, which is the core of our process. So we practice trust-based philanthropy and participatory grant-making approach, like I mentioned, by centering community leadership in our grant-making process. So we also work hard in minimizing red tape, ensuring that our grant process is designed for inclusion. So we accept grant applications in multiple languages, English or French. We have our grant guidelines and core information around applying for grants translated in over 7 languages. We put community input in every step of the plan. So we have open calls for grant reviewers. We have public info sessions and community engagement meetings to ensure that there's transparency and we build trust with the community. We also provide oral application and coaching support throughout the application process. We have also built or installed a feedback loop to get feedback from grant applications, from grant applicants, from community, from our partners as well, in order to use the information to refine our programs. We are aware that we're quite new. We've only launched this twice. So we've had a Black Ideas Grant 1.0 and 2.0, but we want to create that feedback loop to be able to refine our processes, always carrying community along in every step of the way. We have our flexible grant streams. So the core, which focuses on operations, Catapult, which focuses on programs, and community spaces, will meet community at different levels and address different needs. We are hoping that we keep connecting with new grantees. Something we learned from our Black Ideas 1.0 and 2.0 was that we supported groups that were receiving funding for the first time. And our learning was that these organizations needed more hand-holding, coaching through the process for application, coaching through the process for reporting as well. And what this has shown us is that reaching groups that have been historically overlooked by funders is really critical in the work we do. And we hope to keep seeing this happen and also keep providing that support. Yeah, that's all I have on my presentation. Our website really captures all the work we are doing and all the work we're hoping to do. Please follow us on our social handles as well. You'll see we are also going to be going out soon into community to have our call for reviewers. Our community selection circle keeps increasing. During our Black Ideas 1.0, we had about 214 reviewers across the country. Right, for the 2.0, we had about 291 reviewers across the country. We're hoping to expand this to 350 reviewers by the 3.0 grant stream going out in the fall. It's really important we have as diverse or very diverse voice at the table for reviewers, because they are the ones that make the decision, not the FFBC team. And they are the ones that understand what the priorities of their communities are. And yeah, that's all I have from my end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nneka. Wow. Yeah, what an oppressive array of approaches and thoughtfulness that FFBC is bringing to all these processes, and it's wonderful to learn more about your work. 350 reviewers is a lot of people. So, so great. So we've gotten an amazing overview from each presenter and each foundation, and we have some questions now. And if a reminder, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A. We've got about 15 minutes for questions, so we'll see what we can get to. So I'm going to start with a few of the questions that are for every panelist. So if you could just keep your response, you know, as efficient as possible, so we can try to get to as many questions as possible, that would be great. And some of you have already started to answer this, but just to make sure that we all get the full answer, do you only fund charities? And if not, or would you accept trustees for unincorporated grassroots groups? So let's just keep the order that we've been operating in. It will be easiest. So yeah, Aldeli, please.
Yeah, so like I said, we fund all 3 levels of organizations, so grassroots groups, registered nonprofits, registered charities. For grassroots groups, we just ask that they partner with either a registered nonprofit or a registered charity as kind of like an organizational mentor model, to be like a trustee for them.
Thanks. Bayan, what about Northpine? Oh, you're on mute.
As I mentioned earlier, we fund every type of entity.
And McConnell? No.
So we also fund charities, nonprofits, and what we call non-qualified donees. And maybe what I just wanted to call out is that there's been a shift in the rules, where even from a CRA perspective, most foundations and most funders are allowed to be able to support non-qualified donees. And actually, McConnell Foundation was quite instrumental in advocating for that in 2024 when we developed that funder toolkit. And so definitely we do. However, to be quite frank, social enterprises, individuals, and groups that are not structured in an organization tend to not be really the groups we fund the most.
Thank you. Nika?
At FFBC, we fund incorporated nonprofits and charities, and also grassroots organizations partnering with the incorporated groups as well. We don't fund for-profits. We do fund religious organizations, but their activities have to serve the broader community and not just their congregation or members.
Okay. Thank you. And what about the amount and the amount that you provide? Is there a cap to how much funding you would provide? Again, this question is for everybody. Aldeli, would you go first?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. What is the amount of funding you provide, and is there a maximum?
Yeah, so that's a great question. For the Black Youth Fund, that will be decided by next year, so TBD. For Indigenous Youth and Communities Future Fund, the ceiling is $30,000 for 6 months to a year project. And for the Youth Action Fund, this one is currently being revamped. So again, kind of TBD on this one as well for next year, but in the past, it's been up to $300,000, meaning $100,000 per year for a maximum of 3 years.
We don't have a specific amount. It really depends on the organizations, what they're able to do, what is the impact they're able to produce, and then we kind of take it from there and decide what resources are needed to make that happen.
So we also don't have a specific amount, but realistically, there's we tend to make larger grants, right? So in average, 150 a year, maybe 250 a year. We can go but below 100,000, these tend to not be our regular grants. We have two other streams that we call the opportunity grants and the program development grants that tend to be below $50,000. And more information about that is available in the partnership and funding guide. But in general, we go multi-year, 150 to 250 and even more if possible. Depends, as Bayan said, on the project and the outcome.
Our core grant stream, which is focused on operational needs, is capped as 30 grand. For the programmatic funding, which is a catapult grant stream, is capped at 80 grand. And then the community spaces grant stream for infrastructural development is capped at 200 grand.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all so much. Some of you have already spoken to this, but there's a question about long-term funding. You know, sustainability is always challenging for organizations in the not-for-profit, community-based sector. Some of you have mentioned, usually you do a few years, some renewability. Can you just speak to how you typically approach timelines, one-time grants, multi-year renewals, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do a mix of one-time funding. We also do multi-years. And for us as well, it's like if you currently have a project with us and you want to apply to another stream, nothing bars you from doing that. As long as you can demonstrate that your project is different enough, right? I think that's kind of the idea. For us, when we look at who's getting funded, we also try to make sure that, this is the evaluators, right? Because we have a group of folks, advisors who make the decisions. The staff are not the ones who make the decisions on who gets funded. And those folks represent folks in the community. And they represent also the focus areas that we focus on. But they usually look at folks that we have been in relationship with, funding relationship with, as well as folks who have never been funded by us before. So we try to have a bit of a mix of groups, especially because we tend to fund, the majority of groups that we fund tend to be grassroots organizations or groups and collectives. We are also very conscious that as a youth funder, sometimes we tend to be their first grant. And so that's something that we are kind of thinking about in that sense. So we tend to look at folks who haven't been funded before, and rather than looking at it in a punitive way, being like, okay, let's see if we can support them and try to get them to then get other grants through other funders. And so when it comes to sustainability, some of the things that we offer is also making warm connections with other foundations. So, folks on the panel, I have made connections to all of these folks or all of these foundations. So obviously it doesn't mean that there's necessarily going to be additional funding guaranteed, but it just means that you have a face-to-face or a connection being made. So in terms of sustainability, that's a bit of a different way to looking at it, right? So not just looking at sustainability from our specific foundation, which especially for some of the streams, the competition ratio can be really, really high and hard to get just because the demand is so intense. So instead, how do we get you to know other foundations that you might not have heard of before or that you might not have gotten funding from?
So for Northpine, we don't really have a strict structure. A lot of things at Northpine are quite flexible. The one thing we're very focused on is outcomes for that one particular community. And so we'll often do what we feel makes sense at the time in terms of continuing that impact. For example, if we invest in an organization that produces really great outcomes, we would potentially reinvest in them to continue. Most starting out investments are between 1 to 3 years. And then after that, we can do a second investment if we're excited about the outcomes.
Thank you so much for the question. I think I spoke to it a little bit on the fact that we definitely go multi-year. So usually most grants will be 3 years. We can go more than that when it makes sense. But I think I want to clearly address the fact that we are probably not the right funder for organizations that are looking for a replacement for government funding. So it's not really the right fit. The fit for us is more if you have a special project, something you've always been wanting to do that is something about at the systems level, that is something that's challenging the status quo. That level, that's where we tend to be more of a fit for that. And so we can do renewals, but in the over 2 years I've been here, we have renewed 2 partnerships, I believe, in communities. So it wouldn't be accurate for me to tell you that that's something we do a lot. And the last thing I wanted to say that I forgot to mention is we as a team, as a programs team, only make recommendations and then the board makes a final decision. So it's important that people understand that in the process. After the due diligence process, the board, which are the members of the family, make the final decisions.
Thanks for the question, Madeline. It's a very important question in the space we found ourselves in, especially where we serve a largely underfunded group in Canada. For now, our grant stream, the Black Ideas grant stream, is not multi-year. Is it something we're chatting about at the foundation? Yes, we have these conversations really constantly. But the Black Ideas grant stream is being faced with it always being oversubscribed, where we get requests that tons of requests, and we can't fund every request that we get in each stream. In the past 2 iterations of the grant stream have seen where we are funding maybe less than 2% of the requests that we receive. And it just shows the magnitude of the need in the community. Would we be considering multi-year funding in the future? Maybe, yes, because it's really important we do that. But for right now, we don't have that being available because we have to be equitable to support as many groups with each stream as possible.
Thank you. So this question is really for you now, Lou. You mentioned the newest pillar, regeneration, and there's a question around what you mean by historical harm and how this is different from systemic issues in your assessment.
That's a very good question. So maybe one of the ways I can answer that is this whole idea of regeneration comes from what we can call biomimicry. And so it's a complicated word to just say that sometimes some communities are developing their processes by following how nature operates. And so regeneration is the same thing. It's a natural process that exists in the world where sometimes, ecosystems heal themselves, from their own power and their own energy when they follow certain conditions. So when you apply that to our granting, what really we are trying to do is to address, to fund projects that are intentionally trying to recreate that future. I want to give you a specific example. So repairing relationships, that have been impacted by history and things like that. One example that we have is funding that we gave to two organizations in BC, Hua Foundation and Hogan Zali, who are actually one that is an Asian focused Asian community focused organization. The other one that is a Black focused organization, looking at the challenges in downtown East Side in Vancouver, where the municipal government unfortunately historically has managed their relationship in a way that fostered division between the communities about the way that they were managing the space there. And so when we heard about that issue, we proactively reached out and tried to fund that kind of collective work that they're trying to do to heal the relationships there and try to develop a common vision for how the two communities could work properly. So that's what we mean by that. But I understand behind the question that many systemic issues do come from historical harm. So it's hard to say that something is not about regeneration, but in really what we're looking for, and it's a new pillar, what we're looking for is to invest in these groups that already have that kind of mentality and that are already engaged in that healing work, multi-generational healing work together. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. So we're starting to run out of time, but I wanted every panelist to just have a final opportunity for if there's a call coming up or there's one more thing you want to mention very briefly. There was also one question which we didn't get to, so if you want to answer that very quickly, which is just what is the average turnaround time from application to approval? I do see that Aldeli, you've answered the question in the chat, so you can use your 60 seconds for whatever final shout out you want to share with our attendees.
Sounds good. Thanks, Madeline. We don't really have anything open right now in terms of calls for application because everything already, like all the calls happen in the first quarter of the year that we had opened. But really what you're going to be wanting to look at is next year. There's going to be a lot more with the strategic plan that's going to come up next year. So make sure to take a look out for those. Like I said earlier, social media is really the way that you're going to find out about a lot of our calls for proposals or newsletters as well. I'll put it in the chat as well, the link to sign up. And yeah, just thank you so much for being there. And if you have any questions, you can also let me know.
So for us, I would say it really varies, but it depends on how ready an organization comes to me. So it could be as quick as a few weeks and it could take a few months as well. I would want to add also that if anybody wants to just chat with me, not about like necessarily a project that you're doing, but about what you heard today in terms of our process and Northpine, and if everything I said makes sense or doesn't make sense, I really appreciate being challenged on everything that I said. So I'm open to that, happy to have a chat with you guys about the bigger picture, or even just talking about refugees in Canada in general, and the problems and solutions and what's working, not working. I love those kinds of conversations as well.
Yes, thank you so much. And maybe wanted to mention, we also have office hours. So you can actually sign up for office hours where you can meet up with one of our team members and explain what you're thinking about. And then we will have like a 15-minute conversation with you about the potential alignment between your work and our strategy. It's always very quick, so it's not really a guarantee of anything. You don't get like a decision on these calls, but they help you maybe develop a stronger proposal, and so strongly recommend taking the office hours. Other than that, I don't know. I think I want to say that although we presented our strategies, at least for McConnell, these strategies don't mean that if your work is outside of the strategy, it doesn't mean that we see your work as not being impactful. These strategies are often just a reflection of choices that we have to make, and even something that sometimes one of the challenges of this job is that sometimes we decline everyday proposals on work that we find extremely important, and especially for us because we have an ongoing. We receive applications every day. So I will tell you, I could receive maybe 35 applications in a month, and maybe it's going to be like 1 or 2 grants out of that, right? So important for people to understand that there's a really large number of applications coming in. And the last point I wanted to make is we have 2 modes. We have the reactive mode where we receive these applications and we make decisions, but we also have a proactive mode where sometimes we're going to be the ones reaching out to organizations when we see the work that you're doing. And Bayan and Adeli know that sometimes we reach out to other foundations to even co-create things. So what matters is really like what I want people to hear from in terms of communities. What we really are trying to do is to fund your biggest ambitions for social change. And so if the government, if you feel like the funding from the government is restrictive, and in terms of what you can do for us, we fund you to go and do that work in the communities to change things as much as you can. So we are really looking for these ambitious organizations. And sometimes the best ones we've had came from our colleagues here. So I want to really kind of give a shout out to Laidlaw and Northpine Foundation as being extremely impactful foundations that have also helped a lot.
For the Foundation for Black Communities, the best way to get updates about our funding stream will be following us on our social accounts on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, X. What we also have seen is that we're also able to share updates from other funders as well. Our focus is to build capacity across the Black communities and organizations that serve them. And so we don't want to be the sole funders or supporters of these organizations. So we have partners that we work with, and we try to amplify those funding opportunities as well. So follow us on our social accounts or sign up for our newsletters, and you'll get updates as when due. Something else I would want to add here is that our Black Ideas grant will most probably be going out in the fall of 2025, and we'll be going out to community in July, August to get our reviewers in place, our community selection circle members in place. So please follow us as soon as you can. We would like to have as many Black community members be part of our community selection circle because they make most of the decisions of our funding. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a final comment to everyone who's here. We've heard about, 4 very different organizations funding different initiatives for different lengths of time, different amounts of money, different focus. If there's some, pursue the right one now. Now you have this information. I know the effort and time it takes to chase funding. So let's be smart and targeted about that. And I think this session provided us a good opening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madeline, for wonderful moderating as usual. Thank you to our panelists, Nneka, Adeli, Bayan, and Nalo. Thank you, the audience, for coming. And those of you who stayed, we maintained 80% of our audience from start to finish, which is great stats. As you heard from the organizers, this session has been recorded and will be posted on the OCASI's YouTube channel. I am going to not tell you that we're going to send you a link to it because I don't know that to be true, but I make up these things at OCASI, and then I have to explain to my staff, my colleagues. So thank you all. Thank you to our wonderful interpreters, Claudia and Mercedes. We truly appreciate you that you show up whenever we come calling. I want to echo Madeline, please, these are new opportunities. Do your homework, reach out. The 4 panelists have shared really great information with you. Thank you to FFBC, to Laidlaw, to Northpine, and to McConnell Foundation. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, OCASI.